Good evening. I'm Mike Perry. I'm the Executive Director of the Army Heritage Center Foundation. We are a support group for the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center, the Army's premier archives and research library, located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and a component of the U.S. Army War College. Tonight, we're pleased to host Bob Baker. Bob is going to talk to us about his experiences in Vietnam. Bob graduated from the first Intelligence or Order of Battle Analyst class from Fort Huachuca in 1971. He was then subsequently assigned to the 571st Military Intelligence Detachment, 525th Military Intelligence Group in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1971. He was the only intelligence analyst in the unit at the time of the Eastern Offensive of 1972. After Vietnam, he served in multiple intelligence positions, including as a forward area 24-hour watch analyst, an electronic order of battle analyst for Syria, Lebanon, and the Eastern Littoral of Africa, watched over Iraq during the Iraq-Iran War, and in Poland during the crisis, for a combined total of 8 years with the EUCOM Defense Intelligence Analysis Agency. After 13 years in military service, he worked in the defense industry doing threat analysis work for another 16 years, and then taught in elementary, middle, and high school for a total of another 12 years. His individual awards include the Bronze Star, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Medal, and the Army Commendations Medals. He has written numerous articles on the Eastern Offensive of 1972, intelligence, and Vietnam for Military Intelligence Professional Bulletins and the Marine Corps Intelligence Summary, the American Intelligence Journal, Vietnam Magazine, and the Small Warfare Journals. His articles in the Small Warfare Journals can be found at the link that we'll post when we post this lecture live on our YouTube site. Bob is a graduate from the University of Maryland and from the University of Dayton. Please hold your questions and answers to the end of the lecture. Bob, the floor is now yours.
With the Eastern Offensive of 1972, of which I was present. Let's see. So I'll just add one little thing. This is the name of my book is Breaking the Chain: Intelligence Ignored. It took me about 5 years to finally complete this. So yes, we'll go on to the next slide. Personal, quickly, I'm an Army brat. My father went to Vietnam twice. Both times we were in Salina, Kansas, home of the Waiting Wives, where I graduated from high school there too. Joined the Army, first intelligence class to go through Fort Huachuca. They had moved from Fort Holabird to there. And as a matter of fact, most of the class ended up going to Vietnam. So, which actually worked to my benefit as time went on after I arrived. Okay, next. All right, pre-offensive. When I arrived in 1971, Lam Song 719 had already, was already done. But there was a number of after effects that were felt when the Eastern Offensive began. For instance, the North Vietnamese used 130 millimeter cannon, which is highly accurate, and it was one of their new weapons that they had received, and they used tanks quite effectively. So that, and there were a number of other things, of course, you know, that also demonstrated that ARVN had a way to go. They had no training in retrograde operations, and that led to a lot of people on their side dying. There are a number of other effects, which I discuss in the book. By this time in 1971, drops had been underway. We were leaving Vietnam, and so there were quotas of people leaving every month. ARVN and the Vietnamese Marines started to take over our fire bases and fire support bases in I Corps and across the country. 3rd ARVN Division was created. It was created from one regiment coming from 1st ARVN, and 2 brand new regiments were then created, mostly by deserters and others from around the Saigon area, which was also something that some of even the apologists have kind of more or less said that either didn't happen, or they will say that they actually came from the area as well. Next. Here's another interesting thing. Before the offensive began in 1972, there were 2 separate entities that actually predicted that something was going to happen based on a variety of different facts. As I point out, William Stearman, he was a member of the National Security Council. He was a national security member. He created a sub rosa group of various analysts. They noticed various changes in the patterns of the North Vietnamese. And they actually indicated that some kind of major offensive would probably occur the next year, 1972, around Tet. That information was given to General Haig, and it more or less went nowhere. So, and the other one was later on in 1971, a colonel in DIA was approached with information from his analysts there, and they started looking at it. They had originally expected nothing, kind of a normal yearly pattern of activity the next year, 1972, but this significantly changed their minds. The interesting thing about this one is the DIA, had him brief the Secretary of Defense, Melvin Laird, in January 72. And again, apparently it went nowhere. So, next. Why 1972? Well, it's kind of a complicated and yet one of the most misunderstood things, because Le Duan and Le Duc Tho actually in the 20th plenum had taken over, Le Duan had become the head of the Communist Party there, and as such he became virtually all powerful. Previously, Ho Chi Minh had held that spot. So when they came in, changed the leadership around, and as first secretary, he wanted to go ahead and, for a number of reasons, lay on an offensive for the next year, and he was able to, because of his status and everything, he dropped General Giap down to actually third of the leadership positions. So he ended up having his way. Le Duan was a very important figure after Ho Chi Minh died. So, became incapacitated too. So, I discussed that also in the book, because, there was some reason, and there was other reasons too. They wanted to humiliate the United States. We were leaving, and it was more or less their last chance to show us up in front of the world. There's some other reasons, not the least was pacification. We were winning that job as well by 1972. And they understood and had to react as well. There were a few other reasons which are also discussed in the book. Next. Pacification, as I just mentioned, Vietnamization was making a great deal of headway. The Allies were doing what had to be done, and the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese saw that we were making a good job of it, and they wanted to gain access back to the population. If they had to regain access, then they obviously didn't have it. So I pulled a number of statements that I found that they had actually made. Cords was really invaluable. The villages were denoted as A, B, or C. And you can see by what I indicate there that 96.8% of the populace was considered to be pacified. And the North Vietnamese understood that they couldn't have that either. Stats there, you can see we had 599 hamlets considered to be pacified. By the end of 70, we had 103. At the end of 71, we had, that doesn't sound right, most of the villages were considered to be pacified. And that's why the Viet Cong were having a great deal of problems in the provinces, particularly up in I Corps, except the southern part of it. So, okay. What I decided to do on this is, it's particularly up in I Corps, it was a very huge job of all the things that happened. New units coming in, they had changed the I Corps, the Vietnamese ARVN commander for I Corps. A number of changes had occurred, and it was just going to be a little too much. So I just started to concentrate on stage one. Stage one saw a number of things happen when the Easter Offensive began. It began on 30 March. It's also a date of, sometimes people put 31st. I've seen all sorts of things in going through this. When it first occurred, all you really heard was Way, Way, and Way. Everyone was concerned that Way was going to be the first and ultimate target. It was probably the ultimate target in I Corps, but the North Vietnamese also had to worry about their back. So they considered that Quang Tri had to be taken first. Quang Tri, they had destroyed it so much that they eventually did acquire it, but they lost a lot of people. It had become a symbol. And as a symbol, they had to make sure that they had it. They were later kicked out, obviously. Southern I Corps was really relatively quiet, except a new division was created. The 2nd NVA division slid down to take part in the assault on Kontum. And with it, the new division, the 711, came up and was newly created, actually. And with 2 regiments, the 31st and 38th, and the 270th ended up being their 3rd regiment. But what's really interesting about that one, and I'm not sure if I have a slide later on, but the 270th actually came across the DMZ with the 304th and the 308th, and actually participated in operations there for a while before it withdrew into Ho Chi Minh Trail and came on down through the trail into Lower Iquo. So I don't talk very much, if at all, about stage 2 and stage 3. Concentrated on number 1. Okay. All right, this was what the North Vietnamese called the Wind Way timeline. They called it that. We ended up calling it the first Easter Tide, and then it just became the Easter Offensive. This is what they were trying to accomplish, and their guidelines of when things were supposedly to occur. So you can see the first one really is coming down through the DMZ, and then assaulting all the installations. So, and then, we go on further to what it was. So this is also obviously in the book as well. So, but I took this from North Vietnamese sources. So we can go on. All right, this is when it actually began. There's a big discussion. Well, there isn't really too much of a discussion, but you will find that a lot of different historians and whatnot use a different time for when it actually began. I chose, because it only makes sense, is to take the first thing, what happened on that day. At sunrise on the 30th, Major Boomer and Captain Smith were treated to 130s and other artillery raining down upon Firebase Sarge and in Nui Baho. Because it happened and it didn't let up, that eventually the North Vietnamese assaulted both fire bases. I chose to use sunrise, which was really just around 6 o'clock in the morning on the 30th. On Firebase Sarge, I believe the first 2 Americans were killed, Bruce Crosby and Gary Westcott. They were sitting on Sarge, and they worked for 407th Radio Research Attachment over in Phu Bai. They were manning their equipment and everything, and apparently a probable 122 millimeter rocket went through a slit in the opening of their bunker. That's why I believe they were the first Americans also to die during the Easter Offensive. Okay. This is one of 2 maps I'll show. This is about the DMZ. You can tell, this in rough terms, particularly when you look back. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but look at the road networks and everything available from Laos, and then the road networks coming down from North Vietnam itself into the south. This is, the 308th and the 304th. And they came down usually, and then we had 3 regiments, independent regiments, because the NVA did that kind of thing. 3 NVA regiments coming down the coast, and also the 126th Sapper Regiment participated in this. One of their people was caught as far south as Wei. So they were actively trying to blow up installations, coastal installations. So let's have the next one then. The next one is a little bit more south, opposite way's over here. The 324B came in, and actually came in at about around the first week of March. They were already there. They were not part of 3 divisions assaulting. They were already there, and they came in through the trail, and you can see how extensive in different locations they could have come in to and by. So they came in this way. 2 independent regiments, the 5th and the 6th, also came with them. So we had a lot of activity down this way. 3 of the regiments stayed here. 2 went up towards Quang Tri and over at Firebase Nancy, which was probably right about here on a regular size map. That served to not only could it be used against Quang Tri, but also act as a blocking force if the 1st ARVN Division decided to make a show of it and come up north, which they never did. So the map is also available in the book as well. Okay. The third, I mentioned it earlier. Okay, the 3rd ARVN Infantry Division was newly created. The 2nd ARVN Regiment, as I indicated earlier, was taken from the 1st, which is unusual in many ways because the 1st ARVN had 4 regiments normally. It served as I indicate, as an anchor to the division. It was, it was combat tested, and so we knew, they knew that they needed something. The 56th and the 57th regiments, they filled out the division, but there were problems from the start, as I indicate. One of the battalions, though, came from the 6th Regiment of the 2nd ARVN Division down in Quang Ngai. It was sent to the 57th. They didn't have quite enough volunteers, so they volunteered some people to go up on their own. So this battalion was sent to retrain, and a half of the battalion had deserted 10 days later. You'll see underneath this, it says the Communist Underground Railroad. It was a belief that there was an active underground railroad of where deserters could escape. And there was, even once General Guy said that he thought that was something that was going on. It would not have surprised me, knowing how, even though the VC were not much of a force in I Corps, they still were active, and this would be consistent with how they would operate. The last one's really important because after only 5 months, General Guy decided that he wanted to prevent what he called Firebase syndrome, and this was really after only five months, nobody could quite understand that. But the problem was of how this was done. It was a swap between the 2nd Regiment and the 56th. The 56th was up there towards the DMZ. The 2nd was on the western approaches, the western fire bases and fire support bases. And so they were doing a swap. Okay, I think I talk about it in the next slide. Yes. All right. They started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they turned around. This is on the 30th of March. They shut down their comms. they loaded up the radio equipment, and they were off. They started out by battalions setting out. And this was the 56. They were up north in C2 and around Dong Ha. No, yeah. So they started to go. As I mentioned, the second were they're also moving to take over the positions the 56 just left. So when that happened, that when they were already out, the NVA started unloading on them. 130 millimeters, just about all their artillery opened up on them, and so they were just really starting to get cut down. So the 56th commander made it to Camp Carroll, and that's not everybody did. What had happened was, after a few days, that having so much artillery hit Camp Carroll, they were a little restless because they were getting no support from above. And so what had happened was, on this Lieutenant Colonel Din, who was the previous hero of Wei in 1968, he was the regimental commander, and he contacted the North Vietnamese. There's a number of phone calls apparently involved, and so it's really very suspicious. He also, in essence, said goodbye to his wife in Wei. He ended up, the two American advisors, Lieutenant Colonel Camper, he was with, he and Major Brown tried to talk with Colonel Din, but he, on the 2nd, had gone, we're talking about now 2 April, he met with his officers, and then Camper and Brown were not allowed in, and he came back out afterwards, met Camper and Brown in their bunker apparently, and told them that he was going to surrender. The 1,500 or so troops that were at Camp Carroll. There was nothing much that, Camper and Brown tried to convince him that he could hold out a while longer, but he steadfastly refused. He ended up going out the front gate, white flag, no weapons, and members of the 24th ARVN Regiment took him away. So Camper and Brown managed to escape. Let's see. After they managed to escape, and it was a hairy escape for that matter, because they were being fired on, and they had gotten out of the wire and had to go back because the helicopter could only apparently land on the pad, so they had to go back in. Some members, ARVN members, managed to escape with them. General Croson was the senior advisor of I Corps. He was actually the frat commander. He made some statements in his War College paper that the surrender of Camp Carroll had never been explained. Unidentified personnel of the regiment made radio contact with the enemy to arrange surrender terms. Well, we now know that that is not true. The statement directly contradicts what he himself was told the next day. Well, actually on the 4th, because Lieutenant Colonel Din gave a broadcast for Radio Hanoi the very next day on the 3rd, appealing to soldiers to desert. Lieutenant Colonel visited General Croson on April 4th, so I would think that that was probably the main topic of discussion. General Croson also wrote that the surrender had not shaken the morale or confidence of other defending forces to any noticeable degree. Both the authors of Khartoum and the author of other authors have indicated that there was everyone had heard of it. Jim Wilbanks on Locke even mentions this too. They had heard what was going on. There were a number of instances where Arvin gave up, and a lot of those are also part of my book. So we can move on. Here's a couple of reasons why. Combat infantry battalions are at 65% strength. This was in November 71. Eastern Offensive heaviest casualties of the war, 70% were from desertions. General Abrams in May 72, during the Eastern Offensive, said that only 1 in 10 South Vietnamese generals were truly reliable. Lieutenant Din was not the only turncoat, as I mentioned. The previous year during Lam Song 719, there was another colonel who he was captured or just really became a turncoat on his own. He also spoke to South Vietnamese soldiers to give up. So one little unknown fact is apparently the NVA also had a high desertion rate during the war. So we talk a little bit about that too. Okay. Here is a picture of the 56th Arvin Regiment surrender. Lieutenant Colonel Din is right here. This is his XO, who tended to be, he was not very friendly to Americans in general. So you can see the crowd behind him, even though it's not 1,500. There's supposition that over by the rock pile, perhaps some of the prisoners were cut down. They were killed. So I've mentioned that also in the book and let you know why, that could very well be true. It's never been investigated. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to the Bridge of Dong Ha, which is probably one of the more famous things that came out of the Eastern Offensive, involving Captain John Ripley, and he was Marine Corps captain, and Army Major James Smock. There's 3 theories that talk about the destruction of the bridge, which was really super essential. I cannot stress it enough. It delayed what could have happened a lot earlier if the bridge hadn't gone up. One of the first theories is Arvin engineers blew it up. We talk about that in the book too, and how it couldn't probably wasn't true. The most I could find was it looks like that third ARVN dropped some explosives and then took off after they had delivered it. One famous author thinks it was Combat Sky Spot, which was a beacon device in which those aircraft that were equipped, B-52s, for instance, and I understand there was only a few F-4s that were equipped, but homing in on a beam and dropping it on the bridge itself. But I also talk about that and why that's probably not true, particularly since one of those beacons was taken out the first or second day of the offensive. Ripley and Smock, if you look at the next slide, the emphasis, whoops, shouldn't be that one, but it's coming up. That one, look at the symmetry of the explosions. It's just, I've looked at a lot of photographs, and though I could be wrong, I kind of really don't doubt it. There's too close together. B-52 would not be down on the deck, so it would have to be up. I've never seen this orderly explosions on either side, so that's why I don't think that's. I think it was blown up by Ripley and Smock. You go back to previous. This is the Buchanan DDG-14. It was instrumental on Ripley doing, laying the charges and Smock passing them the charges. They sat and kept North Vietnamese tanks from coming down MR1, QL1, the main road, north-south road in Vietnam. They were actually credited with 4 or 5 tanks themselves. And the reason I also say that is because, let me see, I think I talk about it a little bit further along about the Buchanan. Let's see, probably hit 2 more. Nope. Anyway, the reason it is because the XO of the Buchanan, I've exchanged a number of emails with him and everything. He says that there was not a plane in the sky, and they had their air search radar going on during the whole emphasis, and he was on the bridge for almost all that time. And he says, we took out the tanks, and they ended up having to, go along a parallel line to the river. So the bridge blew. It really delayed the offensive and those units coming down from the north. So next one, this also happened on the 2nd of April. The bridge of Dong Hong was the 2nd. Bat 21 incident occurred on the 2nd. This was Bat 21, Bat 22 were EB-66Cs. They came in from Thailand escorting 3 B-52s. Their mission was to jam, and that's why they flew underneath the B-52s. So before they had flown this area before, and they had spotted, or they knew that a Soviet equipped NVA SI-2 was present in the area, but it had never lit its target tracker. They had found its acquisition radar, but they had never, I guess after a long time, months worth of flying this, it had never lit off. So they and the wing headquarters just didn't give it much of a thought. It was not a serious threat in their eyes because there were no launches coming from it. Well, they had to pay for that, unfortunately, when it was down. Bat 21 was down, and only one survivor out of 6, and that was obviously a lieutenant. It was a lieutenant colonel, and Hamilton was his name. He was the only one who made it out, and he fell into the Cam Low area. As I indicate that the SAM threat itself was known by 7th Air Force and obviously the wing that they belonged to, but there was no restrictions on flying over the area. As I indicate, they were en route to Camp Carroll, which, that occurred earlier in the day. There were a total of about 13 SA-2 missiles fired at all of these aircraft flying, and one blew up underneath Bat 21, and that was what downed it. With that, an automatic 27-kilometer no-fly zone was imposed around where he went down. They knew where he was because there happened to be a spotting airplane in the vicinity, but you couldn't do anything. The planes couldn't go through, and artillery could not go through. So here we are. We've got an offensive of troops and tanks and APCs and whatnot coming south, and you can't do a thing about it. And it's right over the bridge area. So they didn't even take out the bridge until for 12 days afterwards, for some reason. Probably the thought was they wanted their counterattack, which obviously wasn't going to happen, but they, for some reason, never blew up the bridge. So anyway, the next slide, I think we continue. Oops, no, I guess not. Anyway, you can go back to it a second. There. He was rescued later by a Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Thomas Norris, who had actually rescued another flyer 2 days earlier, and his name was Lieutenant Clark. He was actually the grandson of General Mark Clark, World War II fame in Italy. Actually, Norris won the Medal of Honor for this action too, having to swim upstream to go get Hamilton after nearly 12 days in the water, up around Cam Low, and then getting into the water itself of the river. Okay, more on that. It's in the book, obviously. All right, items in the book that sometimes are rarely or actually never discussed. The prevailing weather made things, there was little recce, and they would try to get in there when they could. But we had little things that, were available as intelligence-wise. And we were the only, because the 571st were the only intelligence gathering unit up there working strictly on a secret and below collateral intelligence level for about 2 weeks of the Easter offensive. And actually, when about 2 weeks after it started, airplanes were starting to come back in force and taking over a lot of the reconnaissance jobs and everything else. So things started to to get better. Twice daily, we reported to everyone in the world who we could think of, all the units in I-Corps, obviously down to MACV, all there was elements of the 196 still over there, Da Nang Harbor area. Everyone tried not to leave. Anybody else also included USAPAC. It was, because we were it. And so that's what we did. Twice. It ended up being twice a week after a once daily thing. So, our unit was, we ran agents. We wouldn't think so, but we were actually the only ones who were getting fairly current intel. So before the NVA took over a lot more, and eventually all of Quang Tri. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. I think I've mentioned this a little bit earlier about the 2nd NVA division going down to Khartoum. The 7th, 11th, brand new, was created. And let's see. Oh, yeah. Then there it is. May 72, about the 270th NVA regiment that was originally independent, but then sent downward to become part of the 711. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Okay, that was the first one. Keep going. All right. There's some questions. Why was, obviously, like I mentioned, the bridge at Kamlo not demolished for 12 days? No one was happy. I remember that incident so well. It just, particularly the Army people could not believe it. So, but that was the way it was. The second there, how much, I was surprised to find that so many South Vietnamese believed in horoscopes and all this other stuff. There was actually one instance I found where one general didn't start an offensive, small scale, but he didn't start it. He moved it to about 6 hours earlier, if I remember right, because his horoscope said that he should act that way. The time he had picked was wrong. So it went on. It was truly amazing, some of the things about that. Let's see. All right, I talked about the 56 and the 57th had its own problems. They were up there above Dong Ha, and they, even Captain Ripley even mentioned that he was just, the number of troops coming across that area, stripping their blouses, throwing down their weapons. It was just truly amazing. And most of them had to have been the 57th because we're talking 2 days later on the 2nd of April. So it's also when the same day, so we've had 3 incidents on the 2nd, which was actually Easter Sunday. We had Dong Ha, Bat 21, and the surrender at Camp Carroll. Yeah, all right, let's see, what do we got now? Okay, there's that. Oh, I also mentioned about a Malmedy style possibility that the troops that surrendered at Camp Carroll might have been massacred. So anyway, talk about that before. All right, next. Another one, the highway horrors happened later on in April. People were, most civilians and small children were escaping Quang Tri. The NBA were given orders to, kill anybody on the road. And they did. There were hundreds of people in that atrocity. All right. Oh, when Bat 21 went down, there was no Army or Marine organization that they could call to go get him. They had the last one, as I indicate, the last two combat recon platoons in Vietnam left 6 weeks before the offensive began. So that's, luckily, SEALs were there to, they could still put on a mission to go get him. As I reiterate the thing about the National Security Council team in Washington and how DIA also had the information, but in both instances, nobody listened. So go ahead. Let's see. Our information, though, it was only at a secret level, was virtually ignored by all the major commands. This includes MACV, because I've looked back and found the SDO logs for the 525th, our main headquarters there in Saigon, about taking my ensigns and then other ensigns, because all the other detachments were induced to do the same thing. Take him over to the tank in MACV, and I guess it just went nowhere. So the lessons and experiences of Lam Song 719, they were virtually ignored. Arvin was made a shambles of retrograde operations. They ran across tanks and accurate artillery, the 130s, as I mentioned. Lessons weren't learned. So all three, this is interesting. All three commanders of the advisory groups of I Corps, I2, and 3 Corps, they felt the brunt of what was going on, but they didn't think that their own attached information that they were receiving from their intelligence people was very good or worth it, because particularly the human intelligence, the agents derived. So also, we'll get to that in just a second, of why. Road construction in the DMZ, I found a number of instances where First MIBAR had reported and was very specific about NVA construction in the DMZ and just inside South Vietnam. So obviously targets, looks like maybe perhaps a number of those targets were not hit, and I have no idea why, but we paid for it. Okay. All right, here's one of the major reasons that we're always given about agents, is that most of the information they would get would come into them, and it would be F6. Well, there was a common misunderstanding apparently that F6 mean, well, it's probably not worth the paper it's printed on. And so that was really very, unfortunately, not only not true, but they didn't look further to the Admiralty Code. This is what affixing to human intelligence sources, how they did it. I asked the same question when I was there because I was, in my unit, I was the only order of battle analyst, the only intelligence analyst, and among a bunch of area specialists and agents. So that, one of my first and earliest recollections is I asked about why is that? Why do we put F6 on agent reports? And it was primarily to get it out the door. Agent reports are traditionally late. So that's one of the reasons why it's not too well thought of, at least at the time. And I suspect probably even today, based on what some of the other things I've read. That's unfortunate because some very good material, sometimes like what I ran across during the Easter Offensive, it was very on time that, and a lot of inferences could be gained from it. They did it because our people too did it. They put F6 on things to get it out the door. It's very, very unfortunate. This is why the code was developed, and that's why everybody overlooked it. So, okay. Now, here's a good instance of this. We can compare to, I think, the form that follows, but these are at the onset, the units involved in just I-Corps. No. Okay. These units, indicate the 304th and the 308th coming through the DMZ. The 324th, that is the unit opposite way coming in from the west towards way. This is often overlooked. Independent regiments. I mentioned the 270th, and there it is. Going into the Ho Chi Minh Trail, coming back out in Quang Ngai area. But we had others too. We also had something new. No, I'll back up one second. The composite artillery regiments that you see there, those made up, how do I do it? Tank and artillery, well, tank commanders, tankers were sent to the Soviet Union for training. Soviet Union at the time had the triangular concept. There are threes to everything. There were, 3 regiments to a division. There were 3 battalions to a regiment. It was called the triangular concept. Anyway, something extremely new for the North Vietnamese was actually attaching tanks or armored regiments to divisions. They did this. They also attached composite artillery unit. That was it was also an available an available thing that artillery units could do. I originally, in my reports, called them Corps Artillery Groups, CAGs. Apparently the real name was Composite Artillery Regiments. They would put units of different calibers, like 130s, 122s. They'd put in 122 rockets, 102 artillery pieces. They'd put different artillery together. They would remain as they were, as a separate entity, but under the overall aegis of composite artillery regiment. So as you can see here, the 38th was formed, and the 164th Artillery Composite Artillery Regiments formed. Also, as I mentioned, the tank units, the tank regiments, 203rd and the 202nd, which are now brigades, by the way. were attached. So those are just the units at the onset. So, all right. And I'll just add one other thing. At least 3 other divisions came in. So 3 other divisions came in by the time it was all over with. So this, if you want to do this, the parents' peace negotiation, the promise made regarding not coming through the DMZ. Well, I went out and found this, and this is actually says this 1968 Paris peace negotiation promise regarding the DMZ. And so they promised they wouldn't come in, and just like Christmas truces and everything else, they never kept their word. You know, why did we expect it? I don't know. Wishful thinking, I guess. This is an important part. You saw what I had used for the onset of things. This was from the CIA. I found very interesting. Two areas, both in 2 core and 3 core, they also had elements of the 203rd. So that is obviously wrong. Who's going to be, a few hundred miles away and still belong to the regiment, the 203rd? And it really caused a lot of problems in trying to figure out why this. And CIA was not the only one to have problems with this. So it took me a lot of time until I stumbled upon that. What probably happened, I've read of units coming back from Laos and being retrained. They were, say, PT-76s. They was equipped. They'd march on back to North Vietnam and become proficient, supposedly, with T-54 tanks. So they would take, the 203rd had apparently a large supply back in some kind of storage facility. They dug them out and gave them about 10 days worth of training, and off they went. So I'm pretty certain that, I've been able to attribute why this happened. Okay. Obviously, again, it's in the book. Okay. Talk about it right there. The 202nd, they had a hard time determining who was subordinate to them. But again, I've mentioned the triangular concept already. 95 tanks and 30 APCs per regiment. So identify who's subordinate to 202nd, 203rd. And so again, there's the 2nd and 3 Corps why they were probably called all from the 203rd. Okay. This is a select weaponry that I put together of what was shipped to North Vietnam. The T-54s, the Type 58 from the Chinese, kind of a whole, selection of not only armor, but artillery. Here's the 130 millimeter field guns, the M46s, the 122s, 85 millimeters and 76, and the surface-to-air missiles that were brought in, the SA-2s, and they also had the SA-7s, the handheld. Okay. What went wrong? Oh, this is good. This is what General Croson brought in, what he wrote in his War College paper. There was no plan. There was no plan, and there was no positions built for defense against invasion by a conventional attack. This is difficult to justify in hindsight, But the explanation is quite simple. The defensive outposts and fire bases that had served the Army and the Marines well for 5 years, who in Arvin and among the U.S. advisors is to be held responsible for not revising a proven concept of operation? The answer, again in hindsight, must assign the responsibility to the command chain, the 3rd Division and I Corps commanders principally, and to their advisors who accepted, perhaps too readily, the logic of the popular assessment. But this assessment must be tempered with the understanding of the intelligence evaluations presented to them and to the history of the war in the area. Well, after all that, Crowson appears to be blaming the Army and Marine advisors assigned to Vietnamese units, forgetting he was the senior advisor in I Corps. He was responsible for the intelligence he and they received, the history of the area, and the fact of North Vietnamese promised not to violate the DMZ in 1968. Amazing, particularly when I know the intelligence was given to everybody, including all the teams in I Corps. Again, this is the Paris peace negotiations. I already talked about that. That's part of it's also in the book. We can also read it there. Whatever they promised usually wasn't worth very much at all. Okay. Let's see. The advisory command is heavily weighted. Oh, this is, I had mentioned it somewhat before. I was talking about intelligence. Way. You know, everybody, it was truly amazing. We got to protect Way. What are we going to do? Not thinking that, you know, first things first, Quang Tri has to come first. You don't let an enemy in your rear. All right. Again, General Crowson, this is his words about, and really amazing. If you think about it, it was heavily, the advisory command was heavily weighted to provide administrative assistance and logistical advice, with only a token intelligence and operations section. It was neither manned nor equipped to monitor the combat activity or to provide tactical guidance. Oh boy. Anyway, General Crowson had given primary responsibility to Brigadier General Thomas Bowen, but ultimately General Crowson was responsible. The 2 Corps, this was really right to the point when Van said that nearly all reliable intelligence is limited to U.S. SI channels, special intelligence channels. Kind of really hits it on the head. And then down in 3 Corps, I found this kind of late, but Lieutenant General Hollingsworth, who was previously deputy commander in I Corps, was briefed about the document, the Cosvin document of 71, indicating a major change was going to take place. The district senior advisor of Ben Cat, along with the Ben Cat district intelligence people, both American and Vietnamese, disagreed with Hollingsworth on his assessment that Tay Ninh was going to be the target. Ben Cat people were using human intelligence. Hollingsworth eventually just fired him. And of course, Anlock ended up being the main effort of the NVA down in 3 Corps, not Tay Ninh. Okay. Okay. When I was putting this together, the similarities between what happened in World War II with what, the book A Bridge Too Far had had happened. The British intelligence chief to First Corps, the British First Corps, told General Browning about the two German tank divisions in the drop area. It was based on Dutch human intelligence. Well, just as we found in the Easter Offensive, I guess human is a nasty word. Also, in Battle of the Bulge, the fact remains, however, that all the intelligence information on which the Third Army G2 section, that's General Patton's, based on predictions were available to other commands. Our intelligence reports were widely distributed to higher, lower, and lateral echelons of command a full week before the German offensive began in the Battle of the Bulge. This was from Colonel Koch. He was then the Patton's G2. Humet was also part of the Third Army's analysis. And so there's obviously, some similarities there. One of the things I remember going through intel school was distributed to higher, lower, and lateral echelons of command. And as a matter of fact, that's what we did when the offensive broke and we started producing ensigns for the 525 MI group for the very first time. Okay. Well.
Anything more, Bob? We have some questions. We have one question right now.
Well, I don't know if I breezed through that or not, but there was a number of things I didn't bring up because I wasn't sure how long this, I'd be able to do. But the book also, we talk about drones, about SIGINT, particularly at Fubai, how we had a Huey assigned to our unit for about 3 weeks of every month from down in the south and from Vung Tau, actually. And we would go ahead and make the things that we had to do up there. But I sometimes flew as a door gunner, and otherwise I'd just go hitch a ride and I'd take a look at what was going on, how the countryside looked and everything. And I came back and I had maps all over my place. I mean, literally all over the place, that when the Easter Offensive started, people would come over to us to take a look at them because we had the best maps going, most up to date. I could have shown you originally where units were going, what they were probably, equipped with, who the commanders probably were. We had a lot of good things going for us back there. So I talked about astrology again, about how Major Boomer and Captain Smith, they got kicked off their fire bases. Both became Marine generals later.
Okay. Well, here's the first question that we had.
Okay.
So, given the failure with the North Vietnamese offensive, failure of the offensive due to U.S. air power, and after initial failures of the willingness of South Vietnamese to stand and fight, would the South Vietnamese armed forces had a chance in 74, 75 if residual forces and air power was left in the later offensive that occurred in 74, 75?
I think probably so. I mean, we were trying to do I know we were trying to train them as best we could. And across the board, even in Huey's, I ran across something I never knew about that actually Arvin, the Army people were trained by the Air Force. So there was no or little idea how to conduct air assaults and everything. Obviously, our Army, Air Force and Navy air power was key to an Easter offensive, particularly when you start using B-52s tactically. And having been close to arc-like strikes, that's what they're called, that ground just shakes. I've seen after effects of a 52 strike. Oh yeah, if we could have helped them out, as more or less we promised, it would have they probably would have been able to withstand it.
This second question is from Jack. Jack wanted to know if you think if SOG teams were still operating during this period of time, because most of the teams running long-range missions had ended. Do you think it would have helped convince senior officials to appreciate that an offensive was coming?
Well, the problem seemed to be in the Corps commanders. They were told certain things and they chose to believe, not believe it, as it were. I remember running across that Mr. Van was told about tanks from a special forces sergeant who was tagging along in an OV-10, and Van didn't believe him. So we have that problem going on. It's unfortunate, but I think that if you had to identify, there was lots of things to identify as probably being wrong that should have been corrected. That the trail is very much one.
Let me ask a question. If they weren't relying on human, what were they paying attention to?
Initially, for the first 2 weeks, because of the weather, that's a good question. Their own flailing around. I mean,
You mentioned SIGINT. Did SIGINT give them anything?
Well, there's very little, and here's the problem about SIGINT. Until they release it, you don't get it. I have a few things in the book that apparently were stated, and so I repeat them. But SIGINT was operating, but they were closing down too. Fubai was in the throes of closing down. It was there, but it's a hard one to judge.
Okay. Last question. How do people get your book? Oops, we got another one here.
Okay.
Question from John. How reliable do you consider NVA historical records as a tool for modern historians and authors?
Not very. Now, I know some people will take it at face value. I've written them. I've tried to, more or less get their cooperation. I've been, I don't think, exceedingly, asking for the world from them, but never got an answer, ever. So, and then when I do read their things, I actually read their military daily, and sometimes it's just pure outlandish. So you have to pick and choose, pick the area, and if you know a little bit about it, it really helps.
Last question. How do you get a copy of your book?
Well, I took a look just the other day. My son actually today sent me some things too, saying that the major distributors have them. They will have them in a couple months. It's supposed to be published in the spring, so there are nothing but pre-orders right now. The major ones, as you expect,
They go to Amazon and
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble.
You can go to the publishers themselves are doing the same thing. So it's being published by Casemate.
Okay. I want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I would encourage anybody who listened to please let others know about this lecture and know about the lecture series. We will be continuing the series right now we have lectures scheduled all the way up into June. So please do come. Bob, I'll give you a call here in a little bit. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thank you much and good night.
You too.